For a bit of context, this happened in Tallahassee, Florida, in the in pretty much near the end of college semester in 2009. Rachel was a friend that used to live in Canada, but she was from Tallahassee, so this was before she moved to Canada in 2011. She was still in college at the time, and it was pretty much near the end of the semester, and she needed to do some studying so she could pretty much pass her courses in college. Now, keep in mind though, this is in Tallahassee, Florida. It was on Wednesday afternoon, and the sun was brightly shining through the window of a small house. Rachel was 18, and she, of course, was finishing up her homework, decided to step out to take her usual evening walk. Her parents were both at work, so she was alone in the house. She passed by a small neighborhood park, noticing the empty swings that always seemed to move on their own in the summer breeze. Of course, once in a while there would be some younger kids, but Rachel kept walking further. She heard a faint noise coming from an alleyway nearby. That is when she turned to investigate. Saw an old man dressed in tattered clothing with unkempt wild beard, taking a hammer to one of the house windows. Startled as she froze as she watched in horror as the man, who was homeless, managed to pry the window open and crawled inside. Realizing the danger, Rachel sprinted back to her house and quickly called the police. Of course, she was alone. Both her parents were at work. She waited for the police to arrive. As her heart was racing, she quickly bolted all the doors and hid in a dark corner, just in case that the man was still out there. However, the shocking thing was that she ended up looking over to see that she ended up hearing a smash on her window. That is when she realized that it was her house and the man was screaming. He was screaming as if he was mentally unstable. She hasn't noticed who he was, and she didn't want to step out in case if this was the case. However, she stayed hidden for a while, and she never peeked out. It felt as if it was like a couple of minutes. The police eventually arrived on the scene. When the police finally showed up, they searched the house for signs of the man, but he was unfortunately gone. When Rachel came out, they took her statement and left. Although Rachel knew that this man is still out there. She did try her best to forget the incident every once in a while, but she would find the little mementos left around the house or in her room from the man, leading her to believe that he was out there somewhere, still watching and waiting. To this day, Rachel doesn't know why the identity of this man or why he broke into her house that night. She can only hope that he eventually found a better life and left her family alone. Although it's been a while since she moved from Tallahassee to Canada, she still wonders to this day what would have happened if she had called the police or waited any longer. This happened to one of my friends, Grant, back in 2014 or 2015. It was at least a few months before he turned 17, so this was around 2015 at the time. Now, at the time, his parents have been divorced for at least a few years, due to reasons that I will not go into. Grant had never been to his father's house before, and it seemed a little larger than usual. Of course, it was on the weekend, so his mother decided to have him visit his dad for at least the weekend. It was every other weekend, but of course, her her dad, his her husband or ex-husband at the time had a lot of difficulty moving in due to financial reasons, but he eventually got a better job and was living in a better house. Of course, what really made the impression on him was huge. There was a musty crawl space beneath the house on his floor, which his father never seemed to really talk about or go into. One day, while home alone, while rummaging through the crawl space, Grant heard a strange noise, like someone or something was moving inside. Of course, since he was home alone, his dad was eventually inside, shop at work, and of course, Grant was by himself. Curious but also nervous, Grant woke up to work the courage to investigate the source of the noise. He bravely ventured further in the crawl space by opening up a shaft door through underneath what looked like some carpet that his dad put under. When out of the shadows when he looked, there was a slinked creature that resembled a small human-like figure with slightly distorted face. Its eyes were glowing beautifully in the darkened recess, unable to see any facial features or anything like that. Grant, who froze in fear, the figure slowly stood up and spoke in a faint, whispery voice. "I am the guardian of this home for this generations. I have been watched and protected this house. Now it's yours too. Don't be afraid. I'm here to help." Still trembling, Grant felt a little strange in comfort of this creature's presence, although he wasn't really sure. This is when Grant ended up looking over. But he didn't really know about the owners. But, of course, the owner's history, apparently the figure, was an ancient spirit that was, in fact, guide to the parents and their own children throughout the ages. This was definitely something that Grant had no idea, but, however, the spirit unfortunately vanished by the time his dad got home. Grant ended up telling his dad that there was a creature or some spirit inside the crawl space. That is when his father looked, but unfortunately he couldn't find anybody or anything in the crawl space. Now, still to this day, Grant's not sure if this was paranormal or if it was a real person. He had went down to the crawl space a few more times, but he couldn't find anything. And even Grant's dad had a look, but he still couldn't find anything either. This was definitely something that was never expected it to happen, but it still shivers Grant to this day about what this creature was, but he had no idea what it was, as he's never seen that creature again, or spirit, whatever it was inside of the crawl space. This is why now Grant is fearing for crawl spaces. So this happened to Christian back in 2017, and she was at the time living with her uncle. To make a long story short, though, for at least her legal guardian, of course, he left on a business trip a few days prior, leaving her alone in the house for the first time in a long time. She was basically about around maybe 17 years old. She was a petrified child. In fact, she was quite mature for self-relented for a young age. Now, of course, her parents, unfortunately, couldn't afford to have an apartment of their own, and of course, neither of them were financially stable to take her in. This is why Kirsten had been living with her uncle. Of course, it was a thunderstorm on one of the days when he was away, and it terrified her the most. Lightning illuminated every corner of the house. The thunder made her question whether or not the windows or walls could survive unsought, but of course that was just her imagination. She was lying in bed as she had to get up early for school the next day, and it was maybe around 1 a.m. She was curled up in a blanket pulled around her, and of course she had her flashlight not far from where she was. She heard the noise that sounded like someone was walking around downstairs, shuffling and moving things around. There was no way that anyone could be inside. There were no lights on, and nor anyone had called, knocked, or identified themselves. And it wasn't even her uncle. She was texting what seemed to be a friend of hers. Of course, they were still awake, asking her if she's okay. As the thunder grew louder and the lightning flashes became more frequent, she knew that the only way she was going to have to stay safe was to go find out who or what was in her house. Taking a deep breath, she crept out of bed and slowly made her way down the stairs. She checked everything to make sure everything was safe. The house was empty, as if nothing seemed out of place. Nothing had been moved, nor was there any trace of a person at all. The only noise around was the thunder and lightning outside, but after a few moments of skepticism and doubt, Kirsten understood that this experience wasn't normal. A chill ran through her body like a shiver as he reversed course, hurrying back upstairs, and she locked all the doors and windows, made sure that no one was able to get in. She climbed back to bed, and she would never know who or what made that noise, but she was grateful that she never encountered anyone or anything frightening in her house. Kirsten had determinedly closed her eyes, but still feared what might else come. The thunder outside only seemed to grow quieter eventually. Little did she know that she was not alone. Of course, she couldn't really see who or what it was, but she eventually fell asleep within a moment's time. When her uncle had came back from a business trip a week later, she had never told her uncle about her experience in that house, thinking that he may think that she's crazy or not. Now, what Kirsten had experienced that day was completely paranormal. Now, this happened to a couple that I used to know back in my old days, which of course, it was around the same house that I used to live in. Not living in the same house, but it was definitely around the neighborhood back then. Let's call them James and Caroline. They had been married for about 10 years, and they had a beautiful, full life. Everything was going as planned as they had. Of course, this is when Caroline and Line was a little unsettled when their daughter, who happened to be named Elizabeth or Emily, bought a very beautiful porcelain doll. It was at the corner of one of the antique shop in this little shop that used to be around. Of course, this is when Emily seems to love the doll so much. "We must buy it," James said to Caroline. Of course, she was unsure if this was a good idea, but she went on with the idea anyway. When they reached home, they introduced the porcelain doll Lucy, that Emily had got, but of course, the other two children seemed to bring her to life with never-ending stories. The days passed, and there was something odd beginning to happen with Lucy. Of course, a few nights ago, when Caroline was asleep, James would tell her that Lucy had begun to move and walk on her own. They knew something was off, and that was when the children began to whisper to point towards the doll's eyes. They weren't really noticing anything, but of course, nothing demonic or anything like that, to even that being the case. Now, of course, this is getting kind of odd, but of course, this was definitely something they never expected. Now, James and Coraline were alone, I guess, for the weekend, as Emily, as well as their two other kids, were all at sleepovers at a camp. Now, this was at a day camp they went to, so Caroline and James were alone that night. Of course, they decided to have the doll in their bedroom. Now, in the bedroom, they had the doll. So, of course, this is when James decides to put up a video camera, thinking maybe if the doll could speak or do anything or move, then they would sure have it. They waited for a little while, but, of course, during the night, nothing has happened. This was when they ended up looking over, and the doll had not even moved throughout the first night. Of course, the kids were still at camp, so they ended up deciding to see if the doll would move. It was the next night when Caroline woke up, and it was around 4 a.m. when she woke up and was about to use the bathroom when she looked over to her left. The doll that was on the shelf to her right was now on the TV of their bedroom. It was whispering demonic things that really made her unsettled. She ended up going to the bathroom only for the doll to appear right on the toilet. There was no way the doll could move on its own, and this honestly really frightens Caroline. That is when Caroline ended up telling James about it the next morning, and they ended up picking up Emily from school. from camp at the school that was located at. But when they do that, they got rid of the doll, of course, because they didn't want to scare anybody, and they unfortunately never seen the doll Lucy again. It still really creeps them out, even to this day, about this really weird doll. Of course, this is why they would never look at dolls the same way again. It's because of that one creepy experience that they had with this one doll.